Welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we are setting sail into the remarkable world of pirate legends, leaving behind the polished adventures of fiction to discover the quieter, stranger truths that history has carefully preserved. The people we call pirates were far more than thieves upon the sea, for they emerged from centuries shaped by empire, warfare, hardship, and opportunity, creating lives that were far more disciplined and complex than their legends often suggest. As the evening gently settles around you, I invite you to follow these forgotten waters with me, because the closer we look, the more surprising this hidden world becomes. Before we continue, make yourself comfortable and allow the day to slowly drift away, knowing there is nowhere else you need to be for a little while. If these peaceful historical journeys bring you comfort, consider leaving a like, subscribing, or sharing a thought below, helping another curious traveler discover this quiet corner of history. Now simply breathe a little slower, relax your shoulders, and let us begin our voyage together into the remarkable reality behind pirate legends. Long before a cannon ever fired, many pirate captains had already begun fighting the battle inside the minds of their enemies. Merchant sailors rarely knew how powerful the approaching vessel truly was, yet they understood exactly what refusing to surrender might cost, and that uncertainty became one of piracy's greatest weapons. But how could fear alone sometimes accomplish what entire broadsides of cannon failed to achieve? Pirates understood that reputation could travel much faster than any ship crossing the ocean, carried from harbor to harbor by frightened witnesses, tavern conversations, printed reports, and whispered stories exchanged between exhausted sailors. A crew believed to be ruthless often persuaded their victims to surrender without serious resistance, preserving valuable cargo, undamaged rigging, and even the lives of both attackers and defenders. Their greatest victories were sometimes won long before the ships ever came within firing range. Fear itself became a carefully crafted performance rather than an uncontrolled display of violence, built through dramatic appearances, terrifying reputations, and calculated displays of confidence. A crowded deck filled with armed men, combined with the name of a captain already wrapped in frightening stories, could dissolve courage into hesitation within moments. In those tense encounters, imagination often proved stronger than gunpowder, and legend itself became one of piracy's most valuable weapons. The flag that later became known around the world as the Jolly Roger was never intended to be a simple decoration fluttering above the waves. It served as an unmistakable warning delivered at exactly the moment when another crew realized escape was becoming impossible, forcing every captain to decide within seconds whether resistance was truly worth the cost. Could a single piece of cloth really determine the outcome of an entire battle before anyone fired a shot? Many pirate ships approached their targets while flying ordinary national colors, hiding their true identity until the distance between both vessels had almost disappeared. Only then would the false flag fall away and the dark banner rise into view, transforming uncertainty into immediate terror and leaving the merchant crew with almost no time to react. That sudden reveal often accomplished exactly what the pirates wanted, because hesitation could become far more valuable than destruction. Each pirate captain favored symbols that reflected his own reputation, yet their designs remained intentionally simple so they could be recognized through mist, wind, and crashing waves. Skulls, skeletons, weapons, and hourglasses communicated powerful messages without a single spoken word, reminding every sailor that time was running out and the next decision might determine whether they returned home alive. The banner itself became more than an emblem, turning fear into something visible long before swords ever crossed. Few captains understood the power of appearance better than Edward Teach, remembered across history as Blackbeard. Witnesses described him entering battle with pistols strapped across his chest, while slow-burning fuses beneath his hat released curling smoke around his face, creating an image so unsettling that many believed they were looking at something almost supernatural rather than an ordinary man. Was every detail completely accurate, or did the legend itself become part of the weapon he wanted others to see? Whether those dramatic descriptions grew larger with time matters less than the effect they produced in the moment. Blackbeard wanted every enemy to form a terrifying picture in their mind before judging the true strength of his crew, knowing that uncertainty often weakened resistance more effectively than violence alone. His years as a pirate leader were surprisingly brief, yet the unforgettable figure he carefully created survived centuries after the man himself disappeared. Behind the frightening stories stood experienced sailors whose knowledge reached far beyond combat and intimidation. Pirate ships demanded crews capable of reading changing winds, repairing damaged rigging, steering through dangerous waters, and surviving endless weeks far from friendly shores, skills many had already learned aboard merchant vessels, fishing boats, naval ships, or privateering expeditions. Piracy depended not only on courage, but on years of practical experience earned through an unforgiving life at sea. Many of those who eventually joined pirate crews had already spent years working under harsh conditions where low wages, severe discipline, and uncertain futures shaped everyday life. Some had served during wartime, others had crossed oceans carrying cargo for powerful empires, and nearly all understood that surviving at sea demanded skill long before it demanded bravery. What finally persuaded experienced sailors to abandon lawful service and embrace a life that could easily end at the gallows? For many, the decision was rarely born from ignorance or youthful adventure, but from frustration, desperation, or the hope of claiming a greater share of the wealth their labor helped create. The ocean had already taught them how to navigate storms, repair damaged vessels, and endure exhausting voyages, leaving piracy to redirect those same abilities toward a far more dangerous purpose. Their knowledge did not change overnight, only the flag under which they chose to sail. Life aboard a pirate ship was also far more organized than popular stories often suggest. Before beginning a voyage, many crews accepted shared agreements describing how treasure would be divided, how disputes would be settled, and what compensation would be offered when injuries permanently changed a sailor's life. These rules did not erase the violence of piracy, but they created a fragile order inside a world where disorder could destroy everyone on board. Unlike the rigid discipline common aboard naval and merchant ships, pirate captains often ruled only while their crews believed they deserved to lead. During battle, their authority remained unquestioned because hesitation could mean disaster. Yet outside combat, their decisions were frequently balanced by experienced officers and the expectations of the crew itself. Could such an unusual system really survive among men living beyond the reach of ordinary law? A captain who repeatedly failed, treated his sailors unfairly, or placed personal greed above the interests of the crew risked losing command altogether. Treasure was distributed according to agreed shares rather than arbitrary decisions, giving ordinary sailors a clearer understanding of what they stood to gain after every successful capture. That rough balance did not make piracy honorable, but it helped transform dangerous groups of strangers into crews capable of trusting one another when survival depended upon it. Among the many names preserved by history, few have inspired as much fascination as Anne Bonny. Her reputation did not grow simply because she sailed with pirates, but because witnesses claimed she fought beside them during moments when most women of her time were expected to remain far from violence, challenging assumptions that seemed impossible to break. Her story would eventually become one of the most enduring examples of courage emerging from a world already filled with extraordinary legends. Anne Bonny entered the historical record through a mixture of court testimony, public fascination, and stories that continued to grow long after her own voice disappeared. Born in Ireland before making her way into the colonial Atlantic world, she eventually became associated with the crew commanded by Calico Jack Rackham, where her reputation rested not on rumor alone, but on accounts describing her direct participation in combat. What made her unforgettable was not simply that she sailed among pirates, but that she stepped into dangers society insisted she should never face. According to those who later described her life, and often dressed like the men during battles, carried weapons with confidence, and refused to behave as a helpless passenger while fighting unfolded around her. When Rackham's crew was finally captured, later accounts claimed that Anne Bonny and Mary Red resisted long after several of the men had abandoned the struggle, a detail that strengthened their legends even if later retellings added dramatic flourishes. The image that survived was not one of fear, but of extraordinary defiance inside an unforgiving world. Whether every surviving detail is perfectly accurate remains impossible to prove, Yet the influence of her story has endured for centuries. And Bonnie became far more than a historical figure because she represented the possibility of breaking expectations in an age that rarely allowed such freedom, making her legend as powerful as many of the famous pirate captains remembered today. Sometimes history preserves not only what people accomplished, but also the boundaries they dared to cross. The period remembered as the Golden Age of piracy lasted far less time than most people imagine today. Although popular culture often presents it as a vast era stretching across generations, the years that produced the names most people recognize occupied only a brief moment between the late 17th and early 18th centuries. How did such a short chapter leave such an enormous mark on history? The answer lies partly in the changing world surrounding the Atlantic Ocean during those decades. European wars had trained thousands of experienced sailors and privateers, yet peace suddenly left many of them unemployed, while valuable merchant ships continued crossing waters that remained difficult for governments to protect. Opportunity and weak enforcement met at exactly the right moment, allowing piracy to flourish with remarkable speed. Eventually, the great powers answered with stronger naval patrols, royal pardons, criminal trials, and public executions designed to discourage anyone tempted to follow the same path. Trade routes gradually became more secure, hidden havens disappeared, and the brief explosion of piracy faded almost as quickly as it had emerged. Perhaps its legend became even larger because the age itself vanished before the world fully understood what it had been. Although the Caribbean dominates modern imagination, pirates never limited their activities to a single sea. Wherever valuable ships crossed uncertain waters, ambitious raiders appeared, reaching from the Atlantic into the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean, and the busy maritime routes surrounding East and Southeast Asia. The map of piracy was always far larger than the familiar images of tropical islands and buried treasure. Each region offered different opportunities, yet the same basic conditions continued to repeat themselves across distant oceans. Wealth traveled aboard vulnerable ships, governments struggled to patrol every route, and experienced sailors discovered that maritime knowledge could become either lawful service or organized crime, depending on the choices they made. The geography changed, but the forces driving piracy remained surprisingly familiar. Looking at this broader picture transforms the entire story. Piracy was never one culture, one nation, or one brief Caribbean adventure, but a recurring response to commerce, conflict, and the enormous fortunes carried across open water. The farther we follow these routes, the clearer it becomes that the legends surrounding pirates reveal something much larger than the lives of a few famous captains. Not every prize seized by pirates glittered with gold or precious stones, despite what countless adventure stories have encouraged us to imagine. A captured vessel might instead be loaded with cloth, sugar, spices, timber, medicine, tools, or food, cargo that could be traded quickly through hidden markets and often proved more valuable than a chest filled with coins. If practical goods were usually worth more than treasure, why do stories continue to lead us toward buried gold? The answer emerged only after many pirate careers had already ended. Court records, frightened witnesses, newspaper reports, and hopeful treasure hunters slowly transformed scattered facts into irresistible mysteries, allowing every missing shipment to become a hidden fortune and every unanswered question to grow into another legend waiting beneath the sand. The farther the truth faded into the past, the easier imagination filled the empty spaces. Pirates rarely benefited from storing wealth for long periods because they constantly needed repairs, supplies, safe harbors, and trusted contacts willing to exchange stolen goods. Most plunder was divided or spent quickly, making the familiar image of forgotten treasure chests buried on lonely islands far less common than later fiction suggested. Yet the possibility that somewhere a fortune still waits beneath silence has proven almost impossible for the human imagination to resist. While many people immediately think of Blackbeard or Henry Morgan, history records another pirate leader whose power surpassed nearly all of them. During the early 19th century, Qing Shi, also known as Zheng Yi Sa, rose from remarkable circumstances to command an enormous maritime confederation operating along the South China coast, controlling hundreds of vessels and thousands of followers. How could one person maintain authority over a force so vast without allowing it to collapse into chaos? Her achievement rested not only upon courage, but upon discipline and organization that rivaled many governments of her own time. Strict rules governed the division of plunder, the treatment of prisoners, obedience within the fleet, and punishment for those who threatened the stability of the entire Confederation, transforming what many imagine as scattered pirate bands into something closer to a floating state. Her authority depended as much upon administration as upon fear. Perhaps even more remarkable than the scale of her command was the way her story concluded. Instead of dying during battle or facing execution, she negotiated favorable terms with imperial authorities, left piracy behind, and preserved both her life and her reputation, accomplishing something that very few legendary pirate leaders ever managed to achieve. Her legacy reminds us that lasting power sometimes depends more upon knowing when to leave than upon knowing how to conquer. Blackbeard's own career followed a very different path, lasting only a handful of years before ending in violent confrontation. Even within that brief period, he captured numerous merchant vessels, blockaded the port of Charleston, and spread fear so effectively that entire coastal communities believed he could appear almost anywhere along the Atlantic seaboard. His greatest strength did not come from overwhelming numbers, but from speed, careful planning, and a reputation that often arrived before his ship itself. The legends surrounding Blackbeard expanded because every successful encounter strengthened the stories already circulating from one harbor to another. Merchants remembered sudden appearances, humiliating losses, and terrifying displays that convinced many sailors resistance was hopeless long before the fighting began. His time upon the sea was surprisingly short, yet it proved long enough to establish the image that still defines the pirate captain in popular imagination. History often measures influence differently than years. Blackbeard ruled no kingdom and commanded his greatest power for only a brief chapter of his life, yet the figure he created became larger than the man himself, surviving centuries after the waves closed over his final battle. Few names demonstrate more clearly how legend can outlive reality, especially when fear itself becomes part of the story. Henry Morgan's life demonstrates how uncertain the boundary between pirate, privateer, and national hero could become during the Great Age of Empire. To the Spanish colonies, he was a feared raider responsible for devastating attacks across the Caribbean. Yet to many in England, he appeared as a valuable commander striking at a powerful rival on behalf of the crown. How could the very same man be remembered as both a criminal and a celebrated servant, depending entirely upon who was telling the story? His most famous campaigns, including the assault on Panama, brought enormous destruction while also delivering considerable rewards to those who supported his expeditions. As political circumstances shifted, controversy surrounded many of his actions, yet rather than disappearing into disgrace, Morgan eventually entered colonial government after receiving a knighthood and later serving as lieutenant governor of Jamaica. His remarkable transformation reveals how easily maritime violence could change its name when imperial interests demanded a different interpretation. Morgan's career reminds us that history often judges identical actions through completely different lenses. One nation recorded a ruthless outlaw who spread fear across its settlements, while another preserved the image of a courageous leader advancing national ambitions against a dangerous enemy. The truth remained unchanged, but the label attached to it depended almost entirely upon the flag flying overhead. William Kidd followed an even more ironic path through maritime history. He began his famous voyage carrying official authorization to pursue pirates and hostile vessels, supported by influential investors who expected both legal success and financial reward. What happens when the hunter slowly becomes the very figure he was originally sent to destroy? A series of disputed captures, political complications, and unfortunate decisions gradually pulled Kidd into a position from which escape became increasingly impossible. The seizure of a valuable merchant ship whose legal status remained fiercely debated turned powerful supporters into distant observers, leaving Kidd to defend himself, while those once eager to share his success found every reason to protect their own reputations instead. By the time his case reached the courts, he stood almost entirely alone. Kidd insisted until the end that he had acted within the authority granted to him, yet his arguments failed to prevent conviction and execution. Before returning to face judgment, he had concealed part of his wealth, unintentionally giving later generations another mystery to explore and helping transform his downfall into one of piracy's most enduring legends. His story became a warning, but it also became another unanswered question that history continues to revisit. Among the most successful pirate captains of the Golden Age stood Bartholomew Roberts, remembered by many simply as Black Bart. Unlike several famous contemporaries, Roberts never dreamed of becoming a pirate until his own ship was captured. Yet once chosen to lead, he displayed extraordinary discipline and determination that soon made him one of the most effective raiders on the Atlantic. Could the greatest pirate commander have begun his career against his own wishes? Historical estimates credit Roberts with capturing hundreds of vessels, a total that exceeds the achievements of many far more recognizable names. Rather than remaining within a single hunting ground, he moved relentlessly between the Americas, West Africa, and other busy trade routes, constantly shifting his operations before authorities could predict his next appearance. Merchants feared not only his aggression, but his remarkable ability to strike where they felt safest. Roberts also cultivated an image very different from the familiar stereotype of the reckless pirate. Contemporary accounts describe a commander who valued discipline, enforced strict rules aboard ship, and expected professionalism from those who sailed under his command, proving that lasting success often depended more upon organization than uncontrolled violence. His reputation reminds us that the most dangerous leaders were not always the loudest, but frequently the ones who remained calm while everyone else surrendered to panic. On Rackham, remembered as Calico Jack, never matched the greatest pirate captains in captured prizes or military success, yet his name survived for a very different reason. The flag most often linked to him, displaying a skull above crossed cutlasses, became one of the most recognizable symbols ever associated with piracy, proving that a powerful image can sometimes outlive remarkable achievements. Why does history occasionally preserve a symbol more vividly than the person who first carried it? The striking design communicated everything a frightened sailor needed to understand within moments, suggesting death, violence, and the certainty that resistance would come at a terrible price. Rackham himself enjoyed only a relatively modest pirate career before capture ended his adventures, yet the banner connected to his name continued appearing in books, paintings, films, and countless later interpretations of pirate life. Long after his ship disappeared beneath the tides of history, the symbol kept sailing across generations. His colorful nickname, earned from the bright calico clothing he supposedly favored, gave him an identity that contrasted with darker and more intimidating figures like Blackbeard. Although his record at sea never rivaled the greatest captains of the Golden Age, history chose to remember him through a single unforgettable image, demonstrating once again that memory often follows the strongest story rather than the greatest accomplishment. Sometimes a legend survives because people continue recognizing its face even after forgetting the life behind it. Rackham's crew became even more famous because Bonnie and Mary Red sailed together beneath his command, creating one of the most unusual partnerships recorded in pirate history. Mary had already lived a remarkable life shaped by disguise and constant reinvention before joining the crew, while Anne brought her own reputation for courage, determination, and refusal to accept the limits imposed upon her. Together, they challenged expectations in ways that fascinated both their contemporaries and later generations. When the crew was eventually captured, later accounts claimed that Anne and Mary fought with greater determination than many of the men around them, though repeated retellings almost certainly added dramatic details over time. During their trial, both women delayed immediate execution by revealing that they were pregnant, an unexpected legal circumstance that added another unforgettable chapter to stories already filled with extraordinary events. Could that surprising turn of fate be one more reason their names never disappeared from history? Even when separating documented facts from later embellishments becomes difficult, their historical presence remains undeniable. They stood inside a profession overwhelmingly dominated by men, while refusing to disappear quietly into the expectations of their age, ensuring that their lives would remain among the most discussed stories of the pirate world. Their legacy rests not only upon what they did, but upon where they dared to stand. Mary Read's remarkable journey began long before she ever stepped aboard a pirate vessel. According to the best-known accounts, she spent much of her early life disguised as a boy, allowing her to move through occupations and military service that would have been almost impossible for a woman under ordinary circumstances. Every new identity became another lesson in surviving a world where appearance often determined opportunity. Those experiences taught her discipline, resilience, and the ability to cross social boundaries that many people accepted without question. Although early biographies almost certainly blended fact with dramatic storytelling, the broader pattern reveals someone who repeatedly adapted herself to circumstances that demanded extraordinary resourcefulness. By the time piracy entered her life, disguise was no longer simply a costume, but a skill that had already shaped her entire survival. Mary's story illustrates how identity itself could become one of the most valuable tools a person possessed during an age filled with rigid expectations and constant danger. She learned that confidence, clothing, and careful performance could open doors otherwise closed, allowing her to navigate worlds where opportunity depended upon convincing others to believe what they expected to see. That ability became as much a part of her legend as any battle ever fought upon the sea. Beyond the famous captains whose names dominate books and films, thousands of ordinary sailors lived lives that history barely recorded. They repaired torn sails beneath relentless sun, climbed swaying masts during violent storms, scrubbed weathered decks, and endured endless weeks surrounded by nothing except water and sky, knowing that every voyage carried dangers long before pirates ever appeared. What did daily life actually feel like for those who crossed the oceans during the great age of sail? A merchant vessel was rarely a place of comfort. Food gradually spoiled as the weeks passed. Fresh water became increasingly precious. Disease spread through cramped quarters, and exhausting labor filled nearly every waking hour, leaving little room for the romantic adventures later imagined by storytellers. The sea rewarded endurance far more often than courage, and survival usually depended upon discipline rather than heroics. Pirate crews lived under many of the same harsh conditions because the ocean made few distinctions between lawful sailors and outlaws. Their ships still required constant maintenance, storms remained equally unforgiving, and hunger ignored every flag flying above the mast, reminding everyone aboard that nature itself remained their greatest and most consistent opponent. Before facing an enemy ship, they first had to survive the sea. Fresh drinking water represented one of the greatest concerns on every long voyage. Wooden barrels gradually affected its taste, heat encouraged contamination, and careful rationing became essential whenever unfavorable winds delayed progress, forcing every crew to manage supplies with constant attention. How did sailors continue crossing entire oceans while carrying resources that slowly deteriorated each passing day? To reduce those problems, ships often carried beer, ale, wine, or diluted spirits alongside water because fermentation made some beverages safer to consume after long periods at sea. This practical solution reflected necessity rather than celebration, since preserving healthy crews mattered far more than satisfying personal preference during months without reliable opportunities to resupply. Every barrel represented another calculation between survival and uncertainty. Food demanded similar planning long before a ship left the harbor. Salted meat, dried peas, biscuits hardened almost beyond recognition, preserved fish, and other durable provisions filled the storage spaces because they could withstand long voyages, even though freshness disappeared surprisingly quickly. Meals became repetitive, yet they provided the energy required to keep ships moving across immense distances. Those famous hard biscuits, commonly called ship's biscuit or hardtack, often remained edible for astonishing lengths of time because they contained almost no moisture. Unfortunately, sailors frequently discovered insects hidden inside them after weeks at sea, making an unpleasant meal even less appealing, though hunger rarely allowed anyone the luxury of refusing food. Necessity has always been a powerful cook. Scurvy became one of the greatest invisible enemies faced by sailors throughout the age of sail. Long before anyone understood the role of vitamin C, countless crews watched healthy men gradually weaken through swollen gums, aching joints, exhaustion, and wounds that refused to heal, unable to explain why the illness spread with such devastating consistency. How could an enemy no one fully understood prove deadlier than storms or cannon fire? The solution eventually appeared through careful observation rather than immediate scientific understanding. Citrus fruits and certain fresh foods dramatically improved the condition of afflicted sailors, and over time navies that regularly supplied lemons or limes experienced remarkable improvements in the health of their crews. One simple change quietly transformed maritime history without firing a single cannon. Pirates faced exactly the same medical dangers because stolen treasure could never replace fresh provisions. Whenever opportunities arose to capture fruit, vegetables, livestock, or clean water, those supplies became just as valuable as expensive cargo, demonstrating once again that survival often depended upon ordinary necessities rather than extraordinary riches. The greatest prize was sometimes the one that kept the crew alive long enough to reach the next horizon. Sailors quickly learned that storms rarely announced themselves with dramatic warnings visible from great distances. A slight change in the wind, darkening clouds gathering along the horizon, or an unusual stillness across the water could all signal that the sea was preparing to reveal a far more dangerous side. How many captains realized too late that the greatest threat of the voyage was no longer another ship, but the ocean itself? When violent weather arrived, every person aboard had a role that demanded speed, strength, and complete trust in the crew beside them. Sails had to be reduced before the wind tore them apart. Ropes required constant adjustment, and heavy waves crashed across the deck with enough force to sweep an unwary sailor into the sea within seconds. In those desperate moments, experience became the difference between returning home and disappearing beneath the waves forever. No amount of courage could persuade the wind to change direction or convince towering seas to show mercy. Ships creaked under enormous strain while masts bent alarmingly with every powerful gust, reminding everyone aboard that even the finest vessel remained fragile against the immense strength of nature. Long before reaching an enemy, every crew first had to earn permission from the ocean itself. Navigation demanded remarkable skill during an age when satellites, radios, and modern charts remained centuries away. Experienced navigators combined careful observation of the sun, familiar stars, changing winds, coastal landmarks, and practical knowledge gained through countless previous voyages, gradually building a picture of their position across vast stretches of open water. Every successful crossing depended upon patient judgment rather than certainty. Simple instruments helped transform those observations into practical decisions. Compasses pointed toward magnetic north, hourglasses measured the passing of time, and devices such as the cross-staff or later the sextant allowed navigators to estimate latitude with surprising accuracy under favorable conditions. Yet even the finest instruments could never remove every uncertainty carried by the sea. Clouds could hide the stars for days, storms disrupted carefully planned routes, and strong currents silently pushed ships away from their intended course without anyone immediately noticing. Small errors accumulated across long voyages until captains sometimes found themselves hundreds of miles from where they believed they should be, forcing difficult choices before precious supplies began running dangerously low. Navigation remained as much an art as it was a science. Hidden reefs represented another constant danger waiting beneath seemingly peaceful waters. Calm seas often concealed jagged rocks lying just below the surface, ready to tear open a wooden hull before frightened sailors even understood what had happened. Could a ship survive years of storms only to be destroyed by an obstacle no one could actually see? Local pilots familiar with dangerous coastlines became invaluable guides whenever unfamiliar harbors or narrow channels needed to be entered safely. Their detailed understanding of tides, currents, and submerged hazards frequently prevented disasters that even experienced captains could not predict on their own. Knowledge of a coastline could be worth far more than the strongest warship. Pirates appreciated these local conditions as much as merchants did, often choosing anchorages protected by reefs, shallow waters, or winding inlets that discouraged larger naval vessels from pursuing them. Geography itself became another ally, allowing smaller ships to disappear into places where heavily armed opponents hesitated to follow. Sometimes the landscape fought beside them without firing a single shot. Communication between ships required creativity long before electronic technology connected distant vessels. Colored flags, carefully arranged lanterns, cannon signals, and shouted commands carried messages across open water, though misunderstandings remained common whenever weather, darkness, or distance interfered. Every successful signal depended upon both crews interpreting it in exactly the same way. Pirates frequently relied upon surprise rather than lengthy exchanges of communication. A rapid approach under false colors, followed by the sudden raising of their true flag, often left merchant captains with only moments to evaluate the situation before making an irreversible decision. That brief silence between recognition and response became one of the most dramatic moments of any encounter at sea. Those few seconds carried enormous weight because hesitation could determine the fate of everyone aboard both ships. Resist too long, and violence might become unavoidable. Surrender immediately, and lives could be spared even while valuable cargo changed hands. The sea constantly reminded those who sailed upon it that decisions measured in moments could shape the rest of their lives. As ships crossed the world's oceans in ever greater numbers, busy ports became far more than places to unload cargo. They served as meeting points where merchants negotiated fortunes, sailors searched for work, officials collected taxes, and rumors traveled faster than any vessel could carry them across the sea. But what made certain harbors especially attractive to pirates looking for opportunity rather than honest trade? Some ports stood at the crossroads of valuable shipping routes, welcoming vessels arriving from several continents with holds full of expensive goods. That constant movement created ideal conditions for gathering information about sailing schedules, lightly defended merchantmen, and profitable destinations, allowing pirates to choose their targets long before setting sail. Sometimes the most valuable prize was not hidden inside a ship, but inside a conversation overheard along the docks. Not every harbor welcomed pirates openly. Yet many coastal settlements occupied a complicated position between law and survival. Local merchants occasionally benefited from purchasing stolen cargo at favorable prices, while officials with limited resources sometimes looked the other way when confronting dangerous crews seemed more costly than tolerating their presence. The line between cooperation and convenience often became surprisingly difficult to recognize. Among the places most closely connected with pirate history stands Nassau in the Bahamas. During the early 18th century, weak government control and its strategic location helped transform the settlement into a gathering place for numerous pirate crews, each seeking repairs, supplies, and opportunities beyond the reach of stronger naval authorities. Could one small island really become the center of an entire pirate world? Nassau offered advantages that extended well beyond its sheltered harbor. Nearby waters contained countless islands, narrow channels, and shallow passages that local sailors understood far better than larger naval vessels attempting to pursue them, creating natural defenses that made the region exceptionally difficult to police. Geography quietly protected those who knew how to use it. For a time, pirate captains gathered there in surprising numbers, exchanging news, recruiting experienced sailors, repairing damaged ships, and preparing for future voyages. Although this period lasted only a handful of years before stronger British intervention restored official authority, Nassau's reputation became permanently woven into the larger story of Atlantic piracy. Its brief prominence left an impression far greater than its size would ever suggest. Safe anchorages mattered enormously because every wooden ship demanded constant maintenance. Salt water slowly weakened timbers, storms damaged sails, ropes wore out through continuous use, and leaks required immediate attention before minor problems developed into fatal ones during the next voyage. Even the most feared pirate captain depended upon ordinary repairs to remain dangerous. Carpenters, sailmakers, blacksmiths, and other skilled craftsmen became essential wherever ships regularly gathered. Without replacement masts, repaired hulls, sharpened tools, and carefully stitched sails, no vessel could remain at sea for long regardless of how much treasure rested inside its hold. Successful piracy relied upon practical labor every bit as much as daring adventure. These quiet moments inside sheltered harbors rarely appear in popular stories, yet they occupied a significant portion of maritime life. Before another chase could begin or another prize could be captured, crews first had to restore the condition of the vessel carrying them across the ocean. Every legendary voyage depended upon countless ordinary tasks completed far from battle. Information proved just as valuable as food, fresh water, or gunpowder. Knowing which merchant fleet had recently departed, which naval squadron patrolled nearby waters, or which route promised the richest rewards often determined success long before the first sail appeared on the horizon. Could reliable knowledge become the greatest treasure of all? Pirates gathered intelligence from many ordinary sources without requiring elaborate espionage. Tavern conversations, dockworkers, fishermen, merchants, travelers, and sailors arriving from distant ports all carried fragments of information that, when carefully combined, revealed patterns invisible to anyone hearing only a single story. The ocean connected people as effectively as it connected continents. Every voyage, therefore, became a careful balance between preparation and uncertainty. Even the best information could become outdated within days as storms altered schedules, ships changed course, or naval patrols appeared where none had been expected, forcing pirate captains to adapt continuously rather than relying upon fixed plans. Survival belonged to those who adjusted faster than circumstances changed. The pursuit of pirates eventually became one of the greatest priorities for the expanding naval powers of Europe. Merchant fleets carried enormous wealth across the oceans, and every successful pirate attack threatened not only individual ships, but the economic systems that connected distant colonies with powerful kingdoms. How could governments protect thousands of miles of open water where danger could appear almost anywhere? Royal navies gradually increased their presence along the busiest trade routes, assigning warships to escort merchant convoys, patrol strategic waters, and hunt down the captains whose names had become famous across the Atlantic. Unlike merchant vessels, these ships carried heavier artillery, larger crews, and commanders trained specifically for naval combat. The balance that had once favored pirates slowly began to shift. Governments also realized that force alone would never solve the problem completely. Capturing one pirate captain meant little if another quickly replaced him. So authorities combined military pressure with legal reforms, financial incentives, and stronger colonial administration designed to reduce the opportunities that piracy had exploited for decades. The struggle became as much political as military. One important strategy involved offering royal pardons to pirates willing to surrender voluntarily. Those who abandoned piracy and accepted the authority of the crown could sometimes avoid execution, returning to ordinary civilian life instead of facing the gallows. Would every pirate risk certain death when another path, however uncertain, remained open? The offer divided pirate communities in unexpected ways. Some accepted the chance to begin again, believing years of danger had already brought enough fortune or hardship, while others distrusted official promises and chose to remain outside the law despite increasing risks. Every captain had to decide whether freedom still existed upon the sea or whether the tide had already begun turning against them. As more experienced pirates disappeared through surrender, capture, or death, the strength of many pirate fleets gradually weakened. Recruitment became increasingly difficult, safe harbors grew less secure, and governments improved communication between colonies, making surprise attacks harder to organize than they had once been. The world itself was becoming less favorable to piracy. Public executions became another powerful weapon used by governments seeking to discourage future pirates. Convicted captains were often hanged in highly visible locations near busy ports, where arriving sailors could see the consequences awaiting anyone who chose the same path. These grim spectacles carried a message intended for thousands rather than for the condemned alone. Bodies were sometimes displayed for extended periods inside iron cages suspended near rivers or harbors, remaining visible to passing ships as silent warnings. Such displays reflected the harsh realities of the age, when governments believed fear could protect trade more effectively than speeches or written laws. The punishment continued long after life itself had ended. For sailors entering those ports, the sight could not easily be forgotten. A man who had once commanded a feared ship across the open sea now served as an example designed to shape the decisions of strangers who had never met him. Reputation had carried pirates toward power, yet reputation also became one of the tools used to erase them. Even so, piracy never disappeared completely. As long as valuable cargo crossed dangerous waters and governments struggled to protect every route at every moment, new groups found opportunities wherever enforcement weakened or political conflict disrupted established trade. Could piracy ever truly vanish while the conditions that encouraged it continued to exist? History suggests that maritime raiding repeatedly returned in different forms whenever circumstances allowed. The locations changed, the ships evolved, and the political landscape transformed across the centuries. Yet the underlying relationship between commerce, conflict, and opportunity remained surprisingly familiar. The names became different, but the pattern endured. Looking across the wider sweep of history, piracy appears less like a single extraordinary event and more like a recurring response to changing economic realities. Wherever wealth moved through vulnerable spaces, someone eventually recognized that controlling those routes could become a source of enormous profit despite the extraordinary risks involved. The ocean has always rewarded those willing to understand its possibilities, whether lawful or otherwise. For all their reputation as fearless fighters, pirates often preferred avoiding unnecessary battles whenever possible. Every exchange of cannon fire damaged valuable ships, injured experienced crew members, and threatened cargo that could be sold for considerable profit once the voyage ended safely. Victory achieved without combat was usually the most profitable victory of all. That practical approach explains why intimidation remained such an effective strategy throughout the golden age of piracy. Convincing another captain to surrender peacefully protected both vessels from expensive damage while allowing pirates to secure supplies, merchandise, and equipment with far less danger than a prolonged engagement would create. Fear frequently proved more efficient than force. This reality challenges many popular images that portray pirates as reckless men constantly seeking dramatic confrontations. Most successful captains understood that preserving their own crew mattered just as much as capturing another ship, because experienced sailors could not easily be replaced after every violent encounter. Survival demanded careful calculation rather than endless aggression. The sea rewarded patience every bit as much as bravery. A captain who chose the right moment to attack, recognized when to retreat, and understood the limits of both his ship and his crew often enjoyed a far longer career than someone driven only by confidence or pride. Sometimes restraint became the boldest decision a pirate could make. The weapons carried aboard pirate ships reflected practicality far more than spectacle. Pistols offered tremendous power at close range, but required precious time to reload, making cutlasses, boarding axes, knives, and pikes the tools that often decided what happened once two ships came together. What mattered most was not possessing the finest weapon, but knowing exactly when and how to use it. The cutlass became especially favored because its short, curved blade worked well inside the narrow passages and crowded decks where long swords quickly became awkward. Sailors needed weapons that could move easily between ropes, railings, and barrels while maintaining balance on constantly shifting planks, turning efficiency into a greater advantage than elegance. Every movement had to match the unpredictable rhythm of the sea itself. Firearms certainly played an important role, yet they rarely resembled the rapid exchanges portrayed in modern films. Smoke quickly filled the air after the opening shots, visibility declined, and many combatants reached for blades almost immediately after firing, because reloading during the chaos of boarding actions proved both slow and dangerous. The fight often changed character within moments. Cannons represented the greatest destructive force carried aboard sailing ships, but they demanded teamwork rather than individual heroics. Crews trained carefully to load powder, position heavy shot, aim through rolling seas, and fire in coordinated sequences, knowing that a single mistake could injure their own companions as easily as the enemy. Every successful broadside depended upon discipline shared across the entire gun crew. Despite their tremendous power, pirate captains often hesitated before unleashing prolonged cannon battles. A badly damaged merchant ship became far less valuable once its cargo disappeared beneath the waves, while shattered masts or burning decks could destroy exactly the prize they hoped to capture. Why destroy the reward when fear alone might persuade the other captain to surrender? For that reason, warning shots sometimes carried greater value than direct hits. Demonstrating overwhelming force without immediately causing catastrophic damage encouraged negotiation rather than desperation, allowing pirates to seize both vessel and cargo while avoiding unnecessary losses among their own crews. Intimidation once again proved more profitable than destruction. Boarding actions demanded remarkable coordination because success depended upon speed before defenders reorganized themselves. Grappling hooks pulled vessels tightly together, planks bridged the remaining gap, and armed sailors surged across in tightly packed groups prepared for fierce resistance inside unfamiliar surroundings. Within seconds, two separate ships became a single battlefield. Every sailor understood that these moments carried extraordinary danger. The confusion of smoke, shouting, splintering wood, and rolling decks made organized formations almost impossible to maintain, forcing individuals to depend heavily upon instinct, experience, and absolute confidence in the companions fighting beside them. Victory belonged to crews that remained united even after careful plans dissolved into chaos. Training therefore mattered far more than many legends suggest. Experienced sailors repeated essential tasks so frequently that handling ropes, adjusting sails, loading weapons, and responding to sudden commands became almost automatic, allowing them to concentrate upon changing circumstances instead of basic procedures. Habit often succeeded where panic failed. Even pirate crews benefited from this accumulated experience because many members had spent years aboard merchant or naval vessels before turning outlaw. They carried with them practical knowledge developed through countless ordinary voyages, proving once again that piracy relied less upon reckless adventure than upon professional maritime skill redirected toward unlawful purposes. The sea taught everyone the same lessons before asking how they intended to use them. As daylight faded, life aboard ship changed rather than stopped. Watches rotated through the long hours of darkness. Lookouts searched the horizon for unexpected sails or dangerous coastlines, and only part of the crew rested while others remained responsible for keeping the vessel safely on course. The ocean never truly slept, and neither could those who depended upon it. Night introduced new uncertainties that daylight often concealed. A hidden reef became harder to detect. Unfamiliar lights along the coast invited dangerous mistakes, and distant ships appeared only as faint shadows against the horizon until they drifted unexpectedly close. Could a single unnoticed silhouette change the destiny of an entire voyage before sunrise? These quiet hours also encouraged reflection in ways the busy daylight rarely allowed. Surrounded by endless darkness broken only by stars overhead and waves below, sailors found themselves separated from everything familiar, carrying memories of distant homes while facing an uncertain future that stretched far beyond the next morning. The sea offered endless space, yet often left a person alone with their thoughts. The stars served a purpose far beyond their quiet beauty. Long before modern navigation transformed ocean travel, experienced sailors studied familiar constellations night after night, gradually learning to estimate direction and latitude by observing the slow movement of the heavens above them. Every clear evening became another opportunity to confirm that the ship still followed the course its captain intended. Generations of mariners passed this knowledge from one crew to the next through practice rather than formal classrooms. A young sailor might spend years watching experienced navigators compare the sky with the sea, discovering that successful voyages depended as much upon patient observation as upon courage or strength. The greatest lessons often arrived without anyone realizing they were being taught. Cloud-covered nights removed that comforting certainty almost instantly. Without the stars, navigators relied more heavily upon dead reckoning, wind direction, currents, and careful estimates of speed, accepting that every passing hour introduced new uncertainty into calculations already shaped by countless invisible forces. Even the most experienced captain understood that the ocean never revealed every answer. Time itself became one of the most valuable resources aboard every ship. Watches divided the day and night into carefully organized periods, ensuring someone always remained responsible for steering, observing the horizon, and responding immediately if danger appeared. How could dozens of people survive together for months without allowing confusion to replace discipline? The answer lay in routine. Bells marked the passing hours. Responsibilities changed according to established schedules, and every sailor understood exactly where he belonged when his watch began, creating order within an environment where disorder could quickly become deadly. Predictable habits protected crews from mistakes born of exhaustion. These routines also helped preserve morale during unimaginably long voyages. When each day resembled the last, familiar patterns provided reassurance that life continued moving forward despite endless stretches of empty sea separating one destination from the next. Sometimes routine became the strongest defense against hopelessness. Superstitions naturally flourished among people whose lives depended upon forces they could never completely control. Sailors carried charms, repeated rituals before departures, avoided certain actions believed to invite disaster, and shared stories explaining strange events that seemed impossible to understand through ordinary experience. Did these beliefs truly influence the sea, or did they simply help people face uncertainty with greater confidence? Many traditions reflected generations of accumulated experience mixed with imagination and fear. A coincidence remembered after a successful voyage slowly transformed into accepted wisdom, while unusual events became warnings repeated so often that few questioned their original source. Over time, stories gained authority simply because countless sailors continued telling them. Pirates shared many of these beliefs because they lived beneath the same skies and crossed the same unpredictable oceans as everyone else. However fearless a captain appeared during battle, he still faced storms beyond human control, mysterious illnesses, and nights when the horizon disappeared completely into darkness. The sea humbled every person who depended upon it. The ocean itself remained astonishingly empty for much of every voyage. Days sometimes passed without another sail appearing, leaving crews surrounded only by shifting waves, distant seabirds, and an uninterrupted horizon stretching endlessly in every direction. That immense silence shaped the minds of those who spent years living upon it. Yet moments of complete isolation could end without warning. A lookout might suddenly cry that a distant sail had appeared, transforming hours of quiet routine into urgent preparation as every sailor hurried toward assigned duties while officers studied the approaching vessel through telescopes. Was it a peaceful merchant, a friendly ally, or a heavily armed warship searching for trouble? Those first observations rarely revealed the full truth. Distance concealed intentions, weather distorted appearances, and ships often altered course as they drew closer, forcing captains to make important decisions while still possessing only fragments of reliable information. Good judgment frequently mattered more than complete certainty. This constant uncertainty defined life at sea more than any single battle or famous adventure. Every horizon concealed possibilities that no sailor could fully predict, reminding everyone aboard that the next chapter of the voyage always remained hidden just beyond sight. Perhaps that enduring mystery explains why the history of pirates continues to capture our imagination centuries after their sails disappeared beyond the horizon. Over time, the stories surrounding pirates drifted far beyond the events that originally inspired them. Writers, painters, playwrights, and later filmmakers reshaped historical figures into larger-than-life characters, blending documented facts with dramatic invention until the boundary between reality and legend became increasingly difficult to recognize. But why do some myths survive for centuries while the quieter truths are slowly forgotten? The answer lies partly in the remarkable power of storytelling itself. A hidden treasure, a mysterious island, or a fearless captain standing against impossible odds naturally captures the imagination far more easily than careful accounts of repairing sails, rationing food, or calculating the direction of the wind. History remembers many things, but stories often remember what people most want to believe. This does not diminish the real achievements of those who sailed these dangerous waters. Instead, it reminds us that the genuine lives behind the legends were already extraordinary without requiring embellishment, shaped by courage, hardship, uncertainty, and constant adaptation in a world where survival could never be taken for granted. Reality proved fascinating long before fiction arrived. Even today, archaeologists continue uncovering pieces of that forgotten maritime world. Shipwrecks resting beneath layers of sand, recovered cannons, navigational instruments, personal belongings, and fragments of wooden hulls slowly reveal details that written records either overlooked or never preserved in the first place. Could the ocean still be protecting countless stories that no one has yet discovered? Every recovered artifact offers another small conversation with the past. A simple button, a broken pipe, a cooking pot, or a rusted blade may seem insignificant on its own, yet together they allow historians to rebuild ordinary moments that once filled the daily lives of sailors whose names disappeared centuries ago. Sometimes the smallest objects preserve the greatest truths. Unlike legends, these discoveries rarely seek to impress. They quietly confirm how people cooked their meals, repaired their ships, organized their belongings, and faced the endless routines of life at sea, replacing romantic fantasy with something far richer and more human. The silence of the ocean often preserves details that written history forgets. Modern technology has transformed the search for these lost vessels. Advanced sonar systems, remotely operated underwater vehicles, and detailed seabed mapping now allow researchers to investigate places that remained completely inaccessible for generations, revealing forgotten wrecks lying peacefully beneath the waves. Every new expedition reminds us that history is still being written. Yet finding a ship is only the beginning of a much longer journey. Archaeologists must carefully document every object, protect fragile materials from rapid deterioration, and compare physical evidence with surviving documents before drawing reliable conclusions about what truly happened centuries earlier. Patience remains just as important today as it was aboard the ships themselves. Each discovery has the potential to reshape familiar assumptions. A single artifact recovered from the seabed may confirm an old account, challenge a famous legend, or reveal unexpected details that no surviving witness ever recorded, demonstrating once again that history remains an ongoing conversation rather than a finished story. The past still has many quiet surprises waiting beneath the surface. Perhaps that is one of the greatest lessons left behind by the pirates themselves. Beyond every famous name, every black flag, and every dramatic tale lies a far more complex human story filled with difficult choices, uncertain fortunes, remarkable resilience, and ordinary people navigating extraordinary circumstances. The legends may capture our attention, but the reality keeps us returning. As our peaceful voyage slowly approaches its final harbor, it becomes clear that piracy was never simply a collection of thrilling adventures or buried treasure maps. It reflected the ambitions of expanding empires, the hardships endured by working sailors, the opportunities created by global trade, and the constant struggle between order and lawlessness across the world's oceans. Looking beyond the myths allows us to appreciate a history that is both quieter and infinitely more compelling. The waves that once carried Blackbeard and Bonnie, Henry Morgan, Ching Shi, Bartholomew Roberts, William Kidd, Mary Red, and countless forgotten sailors have long since erased the wakes of their ships. Even so, the questions they leave behind continue drifting across history, inviting every new generation to separate legend from truth while discovering that the real story is often far more remarkable than the myth itself. And perhaps, as the sound of the sea slowly fades into the distance, you will find yourself wondering which forgotten story still waits patiently beyond the next horizon, ready to be discovered. The age of piracy eventually slipped beneath the horizon, but the oceans never stopped carrying the echoes of those remarkable years. Merchant ships continued sailing, navies grew stronger, trade expanded across continents, and the famous black flags gradually disappeared from the sea, leaving behind stories that would become far larger than the brief era that inspired them. If piracy faded so completely, why does it still occupy such a powerful place in our imagination today? Perhaps it is because pirate stories speak about something much deeper than stolen cargo or naval battles. They explore freedom and consequence, courage and fear, ambition and survival, revealing how ordinary people responded when faced with extraordinary circumstances beyond the reach of familiar laws. Those human questions remain just as meaningful now as they were centuries ago. History also reminds us that every legend begins with real people making difficult decisions. Some sought fortune, others escaped hardship, and many simply followed opportunities that appeared during uncertain times. never realizing their lives would one day become part of stories shared across generations. The myth grew larger, but the people themselves remained unmistakably human. Today, visitors can still walk through old Caribbean ports where pirate ships once anchored after long voyages across the Atlantic. Ancient stone forts overlook peaceful harbors that now welcome travelers instead of armed raiders, while narrow streets that once echoed with merchants, sailors, and whispered rumors have become quiet reminders of a remarkable chapter in maritime history. Standing in those places makes the distance between legend and reality feel surprisingly small. Museums across the world preserve objects recovered from shipwrecks and archaeological excavations connected with the age of sail. Weathered cannons, navigation instruments, coins, weapons, personal belongings, and fragments of wooden hulls allow modern visitors to look directly into a world that once seemed almost impossible to imagine. These silent artifacts often speak more honestly than the greatest legends ever written. Each discovery helps historians replace speculation with evidence. Documents hidden in archives, newly examined wrecks, and careful archaeological work continue refining our understanding of piracy, proving that history is never completely finished because every generation uncovers new pieces of an older puzzle. Even after centuries, the sea continues revealing its secrets one discovery at a time. That may be the greatest treasure left behind by the pirates. It is not buried gold waiting beneath a lonely palm tree, but an endless curiosity that encourages us to question familiar stories, examine forgotten evidence, and appreciate how much richer reality becomes once myths are carefully explored. The search for understanding often proves more rewarding than the search for riches. As our journey gently comes to its end, the waves become quieter, the sails slowly disappear into the evening mist, and the restless voices of history begin to fade into the distance. The captains, sailors, merchants, and explorers who crossed these waters have long since vanished. Yet the oceans they sailed remain almost unchanged, carrying the same tides beneath the same stars that once guided their voyages across the world. Their stories may belong to another century, but the sea still remembers. Thank you for spending this peaceful voyage with me and allowing history to unfold one quiet chapter at a time. If you enjoyed this journey through the true world of pirates, I hope you will return for another evening of forgotten history, where familiar legends reveal the remarkable realities hidden beneath them. Until our next adventure, may your evening be peaceful, your dreams be calm, and your curiosity continue sailing toward horizons still waiting to be discovered. The image of pirates has changed with every generation that chose to tell their story. To some, they became fearless rebels challenging powerful empires, while to others they remained ruthless criminals whose fortunes were built upon violence and fear. Yet neither picture alone fully captures the complicated reality hidden beneath centuries of storytelling. Could the truth exist somewhere quietly between admiration and condemnation? Historians continue approaching these questions with careful balance rather than simple judgment. They examine court records, naval reports, merchant journals, private letters, archaeological discoveries, and surviving logbooks, recognizing that every source reflects the perspective of the person who created it. Understanding piracy means listening to many voices instead of accepting only the loudest one. This careful approach has transformed our understanding of the pirate world. Rather than seeing only dramatic battles and legendary captains, we now recognize networks of trade, politics, labor, and survival that connected piracy to nearly every corner of the Atlantic economy. Every discovery reveals that the story was always larger than the people standing on the deck of a single ship. Even the famous pirate flags carried meanings that changed depending upon who saw them. For frightened merchant sailors, they represented immediate danger and difficult choices, while for pirate crews they announced identity, reputation, and the confidence that their greatest weapon remained psychological rather than physical. A symbol could inspire terror on one ship and loyalty on another at precisely the same moment. The remarkable success of pirate intimidation reminds us how deeply human decisions are influenced by expectation. Once a captain believed resistance would almost certainly fail, surrender often became the most rational choice regardless of the actual strength of the approaching attackers. Fear accomplished its work long before cannon smoke filled the air. Modern psychology recognizes similar patterns in many areas of human behavior. Expectations shape judgment, reputation influences decisions, and uncertainty often magnifies danger beyond its true scale, demonstrating that one of piracy's oldest strategies still reflects timeless characteristics of the human mind. The oceans may have changed, but people have changed far less. Another surprising lesson emerges when we examine the remarkable diversity found among pirate crews. Sailors arrived from different nations, spoke different languages, practiced different customs, and carried remarkably different personal histories. Yet life aboard ship required cooperation regardless of those differences. Survival demanded practical unity far more than shared backgrounds. Communication, therefore, became one of the crew's greatest strengths. Orders needed to be understood immediately, responsibilities had to remain clear, and every sailor relied upon others whose lives had unfolded in completely different parts of the world. Shared purpose often proved stronger than shared origin. That unusual environment created communities unlike many found on land during the same period. Although far from peaceful or equal by modern standards, pirate crews frequently judged individuals more by their usefulness aboard ship than by the social expectations that dominated many colonial societies. Necessity quietly reshaped relationships in ways that surprised later observers. Looking back across these centuries, it becomes clear that piracy was never simply a story about crime upon the sea. It was also a story about changing empires, expanding commerce, remarkable navigation, difficult choices, and ordinary people adapting to extraordinary circumstances while crossing some of the most dangerous waters on Earth. Perhaps that broader perspective explains why these histories continue to reward every closer examination. And now, as our voyage finally reaches its quiet conclusion, the horizon slowly fades into evening, the wind settles into silence, and the endless rhythm of the waves carries these stories gently into the past once more. Somewhere beyond the darkness, the oceans continue rolling exactly as they did centuries ago, untouched by the passing of generations, patiently keeping the memories of those forgotten voyages. Until we meet again for another peaceful journey through history, may your night be calm, your rest be deep, and your curiosity always guide you toward the next forgotten story waiting just beyond the horizon. The sea has a remarkable way of making every human ambition appear small. Kingdoms rose and fell. Famous captains earned glory or infamy. Fortunes were won and lost. Yet the tides continued following the same quiet rhythm they had long before the first pirate sail appeared on the horizon. Perhaps that is why the ocean remains the greatest witness to history, remembering everything while telling almost nothing. Every generation has looked back at the pirates through the lens of its own imagination. Some celebrated them as symbols of freedom, others condemned them as ruthless criminals, and countless storytellers transformed them into adventurous heroes whose lives seemed untouched by ordinary human struggles. The reality, however, reveals something far more fascinating than either extreme. Real pirates rarely lived the carefree existence that later fiction imagined. Their lives demanded constant vigilance, exhausting labor, careful planning, difficult leadership, and an acceptance that every voyage might become their last before another sunrise appeared above the waves. Adventure existed, but it always traveled beside uncertainty. Many never became famous. Their names disappeared from official records almost as quickly as their ships vanished beyond the horizon, leaving behind little more than scattered court documents, forgotten shipping reports, and the occasional archaeological discovery resting quietly beneath layers of sand and coral. History remembers only a handful, while thousands remained anonymous. Those forgotten sailors deserve attention just as much as the legendary captains. They climbed rigging during violent storms, stood endless night watches beneath unfamiliar stars, repaired damaged hulls with exhausted hands, and faced dangers that rarely appeared in romantic tales of buried treasure and daring escapes. Their ordinary work made every extraordinary story possible. It is often tempting to believe that history belongs only to remarkable individuals. Yet every famous pirate depended upon navigators, carpenters, cooks, sailmakers, gunners, surgeons, and experienced sailors whose quiet skills kept wooden ships alive across immense oceans. Even the greatest legend could accomplish very little alone. This truth extends far beyond piracy itself. Every civilization has been built not only by celebrated leaders, but also by countless people whose names never entered history books, despite shaping the world through daily work that others often overlooked. The sea simply makes that reality easier to recognize. When archaeologists recover a forgotten spoon, a worn leather shoe, or a cracked drinking cup from a centuries-old shipwreck, they are not merely discovering objects. They are recovering moments from ordinary lives that unfolded beneath the same winds, storms, and stars that still exist today. Sometimes history whispers most clearly through its smallest details. These discoveries remind us that the past was once someone's ordinary present. The people we study did not know they were becoming historical figures, just as they could never imagine that centuries later strangers around the world would still speak their names or wonder about their daily lives. They simply woke each morning and faced whatever the sea placed before them. Perhaps that is one reason maritime history feels so timeless. The technology changes, the ships become larger, and navigation grows more precise. Yet the essential relationship between humanity and the ocean remains remarkably familiar. Every voyage still begins with hope and ends only when land finally returns to the horizon. Even today, modern sailors describe many of the same emotions recorded centuries ago. Long periods of quiet routine are interrupted by moments demanding complete concentration. Weather remains impossible to command, and the ocean continues rewarding preparation while punishing carelessness without hesitation. Nature has never negotiated its rules. The pirate stories that survive today therefore offer much more than entertainment. They preserve lessons about leadership, cooperation, resilience, adaptation, reputation, and the surprising ways ordinary people respond when placed under extraordinary pressure. Hidden beneath every legend is a deeper reflection on human nature itself. As the evening grows quieter and our long voyage gently slips toward its final destination, imagine the last pirate ship disappearing into the distant mist. Its sails gradually become smaller, the sound of the waves grows softer, and eventually only the endless horizon remains, unchanged despite everything that has happened upon its surface through countless generations. The stories may end, but the sea continues its patient journey without ever looking back. And perhaps that is the most peaceful thought of all. Long after every empire has faded, every famous captain has been forgotten, and every legend has been retold 1,000 different ways, the ocean will still greet each sunrise exactly as it always has, inviting future generations to wonder about those who once sailed across its endless waters. Thank you for joining me on this quiet journey through history. And until our next voyage together, may the calm rhythm of the sea accompany you into a peaceful night's rest. Beyond the ships, the battles, and the famous captains, piracy also left a lasting mark on the cultures that surrounded the Atlantic world. Coastal communities adapted to the constant possibility of unexpected attacks. Merchants changed the way they organized their voyages, and governments invested enormous resources into protecting the sea routes that connected distant continents. The influence of piracy reached far beyond the deck of any single vessel. Entire trading networks slowly evolved in response to these growing dangers. Merchant companies coordinated larger convoys, insurers developed new methods for calculating maritime risk, and colonial authorities strengthened defenses around important ports, recognizing that every successful voyage depended not only on favorable winds, but also on greater security. Commerce itself became more organized because the oceans demanded it. This quiet transformation often receives less attention than dramatic sea battles, yet its impact proved far more lasting. The struggle against piracy encouraged improvements in navigation, communication, naval logistics, and international cooperation that continued shaping maritime trade long after the last famous pirate captains had disappeared. Sometimes the greatest historical changes happen far from the moments that attract the most attention. Even language preserves echoes of that forgotten era. Expressions born aboard sailing ships gradually entered everyday conversation, while nautical terminology found its way into literature, politics, and ordinary speech, surviving centuries after the wooden vessels that first inspired those words had vanished from the seas. History often hides inside the language we use without even noticing it. Maps also changed because of these endless voyages. Every expedition, whether undertaken by merchants, naval officers, explorers, or even pirates themselves, contributed new observations about coastlines, currents, reefs, islands, and hidden anchorages, slowly transforming uncertain oceans into increasingly familiar spaces. Knowledge expanded one voyage at a time. Many of those improvements resulted from experience accumulated through hardship rather than careful planning. A dangerous reef discovered after a shipwreck, an unexpected current encountered during a storm, or a sheltered bay found by chance eventually became valuable information passed from one generation of sailors to the next. Mistakes themselves often became teachers. The pirate era therefore occupies a fascinating place within maritime history. It represents both conflict and discovery, destruction and adaptation, reminding us that history rarely moves in simple directions, but instead advances through countless decisions made by individuals responding to circumstances they could never completely control. Every voyage became another thread woven into a much larger story. Looking across the oceans today, it is difficult to imagine how mysterious these waters once appeared. Modern ships cross distances in days that once demanded months of uncertain travel, guided by satellites and advanced technology rather than stars partially hidden behind drifting clouds. Yet beneath those same waves rest countless reminders of the generations who crossed them with little more than experience, courage, and hope. Perhaps that contrast explains why the age of sail continues to fascinate so many people. It belonged to a world where every departure carried genuine uncertainty, every distant sail invited questions, and every successful return represented a victory over countless dangers that modern travelers rarely need to consider. The sea has become easier to cross, but its stories have lost none of their power. And so, as our final glimpse of those distant sails fades gently into the evening, allow the rhythm of the waves to carry these stories quietly into your imagination. Somewhere beyond the horizon, where history meets memory and legend blends with truth, the oceans continue guarding the echoes of those remarkable lives, waiting patiently for the next curious traveler willing to listen. Until our paths cross again on another peaceful journey through history, may your night be filled with calm seas, quiet dreams, and the timeless wonder that only the past can inspire.